I'm hoping this Xbox sounds better by the end of this video. So yeah, this is one of my good friends, Xbox 360s. He said the fan is making a bunch of noise, as you guys heard in the intro, so we're going to go ahead and get it pulled apart and see what we can figure out. First up, we'll go ahead and remove the hard drive as well as the faceplate. To do this, use a small pry tool and simply unclip one end, and the rest will pull off. As seen here, this console does have the original warranty sticker, and to my knowledge has not been sent back for the red ring of death or any other warranty work. Here I'm using a pick to access the 6 tabs that hold on the side trim pieces. You can peek through the small holes on the top and the bottom of the console to see these tabs, and then simply reach in to press and pull out on the piece. When this piece is removed, you can see all the dust that is hiding behind it. Now we'll repeat these steps on the other side of the Xbox. There are 5 clips on the front of the console that we will need to undo before we can split the case. Here I'll use some shims to ensure that they do not relock. It's at this point that the warranty seal will need to be cut or removed to split the lower and upper halves. This step seems to be where a lot of people struggle. There are going to be 7 small tabs that you cannot see from the rear of the console, and you will need to insert a small screwdriver or a pick in each to release them. This step may result in some small case damage, but if done carefully, it will be very minimal. Starting at one side, I use the small screwdriver to pop the clips one at a time while trying to separate the case with my other hand. Eventually, we'll insert some shims and move to the other side of the case. You can use a small flathead screwdriver or a pair of pliers to remove the disc drawer eject button. This isn't required, but I always like to mark the case where I'm removing the screws, as it assists in reassembly. Now it's time to remove the 6 long case screws. Flipping the Xbox back over, the top half of the case can now be lifted and removed. Now that we're able to see inside this Xbox, there is some dust and debris, so once it's disassembled, we'll be able to get everything cleaned up. Before that, we want to listen to the fans one more time just to verify that is where the noise is coming from. I think it's quite obvious that this noise is stemming from the fans. The disk drive can now be lifted straight out, and the power and data cables can be disconnected. There is one small clip that needs to be disengaged in order to remove the fan shroud. We'll carefully remove the disk drive and fan connectors. The fans can be pried out of the back of the case, and here we'll take a closer look, hoping that the fans are just off balance due to all the dust accumulation, and that's what's causing the noise. We'll be able to test this theory when we get them all cleaned up and reinstalled in the console. Man, it's wild the amount of dust that builds up on these fans. The power button LED surround can be popped off with a pry tool, and then we'll remove the 3 screws holding the power button circuit board in place. Once again, I'm just using a Sharpie to mark the location of the 9 screws that hold the board in place. We will follow that up by removing the 8 X-clamp screws. The main board is now free from the case and we can gently lift it out. Once this main board is removed, we'll wash the lower case as well as all of the plastics with warm soapy water. Removing and installing the X-clamps, you need to be cautious and patient, as if you slip, you could damage some of the fragile components on the board. Here I'm using a small flathead screwdriver to pry on the X-clamp until I can get each of the 4 clips to release. Now that the X-clamps are off, we can remove both of the heat sinks from the board. Here's a good overview of the current state of this main board. Thermal paste in this condition is certainly not helping transfer heat as it should, so it's a good thing that we're changing it now. Here's a look at the Xbox 360 completely disassembled, as well as some of the hand tools that I've used up to this point, and as always I'm using the iFixit project mat to keep track of the hardware. There are a few different chemicals you can use to clean the old thermal paste. I always like to start with alcohol, and if that doesn't work, I will use acetone, followed by a flush with alcohol. This is just what has worked well for me. If you're trying to do this yourself, just note that chemicals could cause damage to the board, so do this at your own risk. It can be a bit tedious to get rid of all the old dried up thermal paste, but I feel it's very important to take your time and remove everything. Heat dissipation is crucial between both the GPU and CPU and their heat sinks, so we'll want to make sure we completely clean these chips before reinstalling with new thermal paste. Here you can see our CPU chip is completely clean and ready for new thermal paste. And then on the other side are these 2 chips. One is a GPU and the other, I believe, is a type of RAM. As we've seen, the board is quite dusty, but I believe using low pressure compressed air, we should be able to remove most of this. Again, anytime you're working on cleaning the board, it's important to be cautious to not damage any of these sensitive electronic components. Another option would be to use a soft bristle toothbrush to gently clean the areas and remove the dust. Now that the dust is removed, I am satisfied with the condition of this main board and we can move on to servicing the disk drive. We'll wipe the disk drive case down with a paper towel and Windex to remove any heavy dust before disassembly. Again, with the help of a small flathead screwdriver, we will remove this front bezel faceplate from the disk drive. Using a razor blade, we'll need to cut the warranty seal, and then we can remove the 4 Phillips head screws and the lower tin case. Before wiping down this lower tin cover, I do want to point out that there are 2 thermal pads here. You want to make sure not to lose them. After removing the top tin cover, you'll need to ensure that the laser carrier is in the lower position by pushing this bar over. And then you can pull the drawer out using a flathead screwdriver, unclip and remove from the disk drive assembly. Again, using compressed air, we'll go ahead and blow all of the dust from inside this case. We do want to be sure to avoid any direct contact with the laser assembly. Using Q-tips and alcohol, I'm going to clean anywhere inside the disk drive where I see there is old grease. It is a good idea to make a mental note of what you're cleaning so that we can re-lube before assembly. This is another step that is tedious, but the console is from 2008. There is a lot of dust and old grease. We want to make sure that we spend all the time that's needed to remove both. In order to be able to move the laser from front to back, we'll need to raise the laser carrier assembly. To do that, we'll use this bar and the small gears to move it to the left. As we do this, you'll see the carrier assembly raise. The laser is now free and can be gently moved from front to back, allowing us to clean in between. We can now remove the belt for the disk drive assembly. If worn, it's best to replace. This one seems to be in good condition. We'll wipe down and reinstall. Using white lithium grease, it is now time to re-lube all the areas that were previously cleaned. Important note here is to avoid any grease on the laser assembly or near the belt. I'm applying grease to areas, working the mechanism back and forth, and then wiping off any excess or buildup. Before reassembling this unit, we will reinstall the belt. In order to reinstall the disk tray, we do have to lower the laser carrier by moving this bar back to the right. Now the disk drawer will easily slide back into place. I used 99% IPA in a Q-tip to gently clean the laser. In order to reinstall the case, we'll just reverse the disassembly steps and install the 4 screws. Here we apply just the right amount of thermal paste to both the GPU and the RAM, and we'll install the heatsink. The next step is definitely my least favorite part of doing these projects, reinstallation of the X clamps. We'll come back to completely latch this in a moment. After we apply thermal paste to the CPU, we will reinstall that heatsink as well. This process does take patience, but again, if you work at it, you work these clamps back and forth, you can latch all 4 corners. Here's what it looks like when that process is completed. Now reassembly is fully underway. We can install the motherboard back to the case as well as the fan assembly. Flipping the unit back over, we can install the 8 X-clamp screws, followed by the 9 screws holding the main board within the case. Followed by the 3 screws holding on the power button circuit board and the LED lights surround. As mentioned, we are going to plug this unit in and retest the fans now that they're clean, hoping that by removing the dust, we fix the issue at hand. And yep, they sound great. This is running absolutely normal. I do have a spare parts console if we needed to replace these, but I'm going to move forward with the old ones. Time to reinstall the fan shroud, followed by the cables for the disk drive assembly, and then the disk drive. I feel good about the work that we've done up to this point, but before we put the case on, we will make sure that this unit is reading disks and working correctly. Now that the unit has been tested, we can reinstall the case as well as the 6 long case screws and both the side vent panels. But before I get ahead of myself, we don't want to forget the disk eject button. The bottom of the case simply mounts back in place, and we will make sure that all of the internal connectors snap shut. Now that it's reassembled, we will power it up just to listen to those fans. And as you can hear, much improved, and this sounds like normal operation. I'm extremely pleased with how this project turned out, and I think my friend will be too. The Xbox is clean, looking like the day it was new. Now that the work is done, I suppose we should test some games.
I first met him in the Middle East, in a town once prosperous, now ravaged by conflict.
As we wrap this project up, I just wanted to thank you again for watching the video, and I look forward to your feedback in the comment section below.